What is up, everybody? I am Seiria. The time has come. The Diminish 2025 question and answering session is complete. It's time for me to answer your questions, and at the end of this video, we will be doing 2 raffles to determine who will be winning a 40-inch by 28-inch Diminish poster and who will be receiving a test design for a Diminish t-shirt. So this is how many people we ended up with in the raffle for the poster, and this is how many people we ended up with in the raffle for the shirt. I can't believe how many people immediately rushed in to offer their questions and their interest. I always underestimate just the depth and passion of this community and the people who are supporting this web series and me. It means the world to me. This is one of those times when I'm kind of remembering how to kind of feel that positive influence and for it to actually resonate and reach me. It's been a weird several years, and this is a massive treat. Thank you all. Let's get to those questions. This is probably going to be a long one, and you might notice that I might change shirts throughout this video and stuff. I might have to break this into several recording sessions because you all came out in force. And be warned, everybody, we will be talking about Diminish spoilers all the way up from the beginning until Diminish Act 2, Episode 18. Thanks again. Let's go. My deep apologies if I mispronounce anybody's names here badly, starting with you, Lord Egil, YGO, Yu-Gi-Oh? Man, it's like I didn't even try and I just vomited every single possibility. I understand the gameplay is mostly unscripted, using the actual game itself for a lot of it, using some events for progression or allowing for video editing. My question is, how has the gameplay in the series been to create specifically in the Apollo Temple area? Because it's all 100% dark. Do you have a map on the side, or did you memorize the layout and are just acting out how Will has felt the scenery out? Good question. That is the part of the series that, even though it's technically lasted a really long time, because that's been some of the longest breaks in between episodes, including the break that we are currently in as of the time of recording this video, I personally, like as a player, have spent the least amount of time in those parts of the game. So that does interesting things to my memory, especially because with navigating completely pitch dark areas, it's hard for me to really make memory connections and kind of recall specific feelings and experiences. It's interesting to try to answer this. But I can tell you that no, the only map that I have on the side is the one that you see on the screen in the top corner, where the game is showing you what part of the Apollo statue you are in. As far as like feeling out the layout and just trying to make my way through the scenery, this is kind of a similar answer to just in general how I have gone about playing the game as though I am seeing it for the first time, even though I'm the one who's made it. Where in the back of my mind, I know what I just put together, but I'm still kind of playing it for the first time. So in a way, I am genuinely doing all of the sorts of actions that I would be doing if I were somebody who had no idea what was going on, because I have done very minimal testing for most of what you see in the level design for Diminish. I've done basically enough to kind of see if it's mostly going to not break and if everything's going to play as mostly though I have intended it. Although Teddy was working super freaking fast, and so if Will accidentally plays the game in unintended ways, that just kind of proves the point of what the game process was for Teddy. So I was basically just playtesting as I was recording, and so if it looked like I was just fumbling through the dark, it's mostly what was happening. And the same goes for the fake floors in Act 1. I am bad at remembering where all those things are. Like, Will was just trying to fly over everything. He was trying to map out his route, to try to jump over as much as he could, because I genuinely did not have the patience to try to lab out every single fake floor. I put it all in, I was the one who designed it, but when I'm actually playing the game, I don't freaking know what's going on. It's partially helped by the fact that the actual game camera when you're playing looks so different than the viewport in the game editing scene. It's a way different environment, and it's zoomed in such a way that I completely lose track of where I am. I don't know where any of the assets, especially fake floors, have ended up. And that is also contributing to an answer to the question of the completely dark rooms. I genuinely have no idea in the game window where that could possibly correlate to where I am if I'm looking at the game editor. So Will kind of ends up trying to get through games that are supposed to be kind of more tedious and trial and error intensive by finding shortcuts and trying to bypass as much as he freaking can. That's how he played the fake floors section, where he tried to jump over as much of it as possible, and that's how he ended up playing a lot of the completely dark sections so far. That's just my freaking dumbness coming out in playing games. Thank you so much for your question. So we have two similar questions up next from Witty and Magpie and Tawan. Witty says, what was your main inspiration for Diminish? And Tawan says, what inspired Diminish? I've wanted to make ARGs/web series myself, taking inspiration from things like Alphaver and Petscop, but Diminish is notably different. Were you into game secrets or something like that? Alphaver, I don't think I've heard of yet. I've been kind of out of the loop with Unfiction lately, and I need to actually not be like that because I feel bad. But yes, Petscop. You brought up Petscop. That was one of the #1 inspirations, and I have to thank my one editor and one of my best friends, who I will be calling H, for first introducing that to me through a random Facebook post that I ran into in 2017. It was one of the longest episodes at the time, the Christmas holidays episode, and it absolutely enraptured me. And by that time, I had already been a fan of a lot of game-centric creepypasta type material. I was into Ben Drowned for a while, that big creepypasta. I loved the NES Godzilla creepypasta. I thought that was so cool. That was one of the early examples that I know of kind of the multimedia aspect of bringing a fake game to life and presenting it in the unfiction way and telling an extensive and arcing and complete story with it. That really, really interested me. So those were several inspirations. I'd say AI Builds, Animal Investigator, was when I really realized that fake video game unfiction series was really starting to take off. At the time, we called it TGIFs, or This Game I Founds, after a line that Paul says in Petscop. I don't know if that's still really used as much these days. And then Illusion Lock, I was like, man, people are really going to town, and these are so creative. Illusion Lock, my goodness, that is a creative one. Illusion Lock is just so Parson Hex. It is so authentic. The one that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, as much as that term saddens me, was Catastrophe Crow. Crow 64. When I saw that big video essay that was like the flowing introduction to that entire ethos, that was when I finally was talking to H and was like, I've seen so many of these now. All of these have inspired me. This is what would happen if I made one of these. And then days later, I was working on the first episode of Diminish, and I think that's about to answer a question that's coming up later. But hopefully that does well to answer your questions here. Those were most of my inspirations. I'm surely missing some. There were so many things that I came into contact with over the years. I first started really getting into game-based creepypasta horror around 2012. So yeah, the Slender Man games were some of the things that really kicked that entire sphere off. So I guess I have to mention Slender, although I never got into Marble Hornets. I never saw it. Still haven't. So I think I'm just a phony. I'm just a big phony. Thank you so much for your questions. The Midoris ask, do you think that your experience with Diminish was a more destructive one, a more constructive one, a bit of both? Or was it perhaps transformative? No matter the answer to that question, I hope you can look through the Shard of Glass too. 1000% a bit of both. I'll try to expand on that a little bit, but I will be at risk of rambling for another half hour. And I'd say there's a bit of a sine wave that goes with it. It was so constructive and so overwhelmingly positive for me for the first 6 months especially. And then I started having my first big pangs of pain with it in the summer of 2021 after it really took off from Nightmind. That was when it first, like, even though I thought like most of the audiences that would be brought in as Diminish viewers from unfiction amplifying spaces, I thought they would all just kind of understand exactly what Diminish was. I thought everybody would understand that it was an unfiction and what all of that meant. I was completely freaking unprepared, as I've said in the past and as I will always say, because it's true. I was so unprepared for how much it would hurt people that were not prepared to learn that it was an unfiction because of Diminish being so personal and emotional and in that way kind of invasive, where people would kind of hinge their connection with it over the assumption that it was 1000% completely based on real people and events. So the summer of 2021 was where things started to take a turn for me emotionally with Diminish, not just because people started coming in and having a lot of pain over that, but also because more people were coming in and just being negative in general, just disparaging it and being incredibly negative about it. And so that, like, you can kind of simplify it as like the curse of fame, even though like I don't ever anticipate Diminish will ever go past this sort of amount of mild internet fame and very niche following. But it was still really significant. It's still the most impact I've ever had in my life worldwide, and the most response that I've received from the world as a result, at least in terms of like cold hard numbers. And honestly, like, there was that 6 months in the beginning of pure freaking bliss. And then from the summer of 2021 until basically now and probably beyond, it's been really tough because it's really easy for me to look back and see all of the flaws. Like, because Diminish is so freaking raw, it's so difficult for me to go back to and even think about, let alone watch or see people's responses to, or just sort of look at in general, just to process. It's difficult for me to process because it's so intense, and the feelings that are being expressed in Diminish and being explored and bathed in were so of the exact time, of the exact moment, and it's more difficult to sit with those exact times and moments whenever you've moved on from them and whenever you're not in that exact place anymore. You might still be a similar person with the similar sensibilities, and you might agree with everything that's being put on the page, but it's still intense in a way that you might not be in the mood for or ready for. So the entirety of Diminish, the work itself, the way people process it around me, and the way I process it, aren't destructive in a way, but they're uncomfortable. I'll say that. Some of it has been destructive, and I've really had to work on that because a lot of that ball is in my court. I can change how outwardly destructive it is to me by working on my own shields, my own defenses, and adjusting a lot of my landscape. So what I can tell you is Diminish has given me a lot of my most powerful and intense experiences in my life, positive and negative. And that has really impacted my ability to work on it because of how freaking intense it is to just think about. It's really difficult for me to sit down and even face it, let alone do intensive work on it. But I do still appreciate it, and I really want to see it through and continue to be as genuine in its creation and in every single aspect of it as possible. And so that's part of why it's taken so long, because I need to be able to be as 100% in it and with it as I have been up till now, or else I'm not doing it right. It's not Diminish if I'm not. Thank you so much for your question and for everything. Sleep Jeans asks, what's your relationship with music in Diminish? That is, were you already a musician, or was the series an opportunity to start learning? Music has always been one of my longest standing and most classically trained skills in my life. I have been a musician for a long time, and through primary school, through high school, through college, in many different disciplines. Although there are some aspects where I never applied myself as much as I should have. Jazz, music theory. My main instrument was trombone, and I achieved a lot of success, especially through the latter parts of high school, being principal chair in many honors bands and having incredible experiences. And I was principal chair for my sophomore year of college as well. And this might sound weird, but people who have a lot of experience with music and in learning music might be able to cross-reference what I'm saying from their own experiences. I was born very, 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 very lucky. I was born with a very good ear. And so I was innately and uncommonly good from a very young age at being able to hear things and with relative perfect pitch, be able to recreate them either with my voice or on a page. And part of that is the fact that I do have something called relative perfect pitch, which is basically a watered down, slower version of perfect pitch, where I have several pitches in my head always that I can reference to find any note. And because of that, my musical life was made far easier for me in many ways, but it was a blessing and a curse because in music theory, I was able to take those shortcuts that I'm so prone to take in video games. And so I was able to cut corners and then miss some valuable training in a more rote music theory and knowledge sense. So having a very good ear definitely has been a blessing and a curse for me. There are a lot of gaps in my actual knowledge that should not be plaguing me, that still plague me to this day. But all this to say, my goodness gracious, I'm long-winded, aren't I? Yes, I've had a long history of music. I was a music major, a Bachelor of Arts in Music. I have not completed that degree, but I've spent the most amount of time doing anything that I've spent through my school years was in music, and doing it recreationally, doing a billion different bands, doing classes, you name it. And so I can thank a lot of that, obviously, for how it developed me before Diminish and leading into Diminish, but I can also thank my luck in being born with a really good ear so that I can just hear something in my head and be able to put it on the page. So to answer your question in a more specific way, this series wasn't an opportunity to start learning music. It was an opportunity for me to show off. But there are a lot of music tracks that I'm actually not proud of in Diminish. And I won't get into that right now, but in some ways I've made some of my best work musically with Diminish, and in some ways I felt like I kind of crapped out some stuff, and hopefully it works. But that's part of the nature of Diminish, and that's kind of part of me doing it right, because Teddy did not have much time, and she was primarily a swimmer. So if things don't come out perfect, that's probably just the way it should be. Thank you so much for your question, Sleep Jeans. Franco Donko asks, was Diminish based on any events that have happened in your real life? I.e., was Teddy based on a real person? My answer to that is even more granular than what I've had to the previous questions. There's a lot of yes and some no. And the question of Teddy specifically is one of the things I feel worst about when I try to reassure people who are in despair about Diminish not being 100% based on real people and events. When I try to say that it is still so real and so genuine, I can't tell them, I can't look them in the face and tell them that Teddy is based on a real person, because while she is based on actual people, she, as her exact self, is not a holistic individual that I've ever known in my life. She is so many parts of so many different things, and a lot of me. She's a lot of me, and that's part of what feels worst about it, is because it feels so selfish for people to be so connected to Teddy as her, and then for me to know that so much of her is just actually me, is kind of, so much of art is self-inserting, and that's become such a taboo these days. I mean, that's kind of what art is. And I've mostly made peace with the fact that my style of art is just pouring so much of me into it. Whoa. But it still stings, like, to call Teddy, like, a character in art. It stings for me to call anybody in Diminish a character, a fake person, because that's not at all what they are to me. Generally, the way I describe Will is that we are basically like 99% the exact same person, and we have the same personalities. There are just some points in our life events that diverge. We're at different places in life. We've had different treatments from individuals in our lives. We've had different types of individuals in our lives, but we're basically the same person. And Teddy is not far off from that. And it feels weird to say that because Teddy made the Olympic team in 2016 as a swimmer in this unfiction. But that comes from my experience as a tricker, as an acrobat, where especially for the years 2016 and 2017, when I was at my peak level, I was world class. And that's just the truth. Like, in a way, I feel weird saying things like that about myself, especially with tricking being a very new and underground and granular type of activity in itself, where we don't have rankings and we never really did. So I can't really present you cold, hard facts to back up what I said. All I'd probably be able to do is go to some of the best trickers in the world, especially the ones that were my contemporaries that might actually know who I was, and ask them, like, was I among the best in the world? And they would probably say yes. So that's where the sort of top level athlete aspect of Teddy came from. And that's where Apollo's despair and dealing with losing so much of their strength and body mass it comes from, because by 2020, I was already losing so much of my strength for various reasons and dealing with several chronic injuries, but a new chronic injury that was really kind of like the nail in the coffin. And that's why we find out that Will, later in his school years, became obsessed with fitness and was able to kind of use that as his in toward being treated less badly. Because guess where he got that experience from? So I feel a little awkward all the time in knowing that so much of everybody in Diminish and so much of the events are just me and not as much inspired chiefly by other people or other things in my life. But I will tell you some aspects and some people and some loved ones in my life that absolutely did influence and shape things in Diminish. Let's start with Teddy, because one of my loved ones was named Teddy, and I lost him in 2017. He was the twin of Kitty. And we had a ritual every single night where he would jump up on my bed and just wail at me until I scrubbed his belly, and he would headbutt me in the face and just like just jam his nose into my face. And he's the last cat that I've ever had that would headbutt my face with his nose, and I didn't realize until he was gone how much of a void that would leave in my life, because I don't know when or if I'll ever meet another cat who loves to do that. God, he was so cool, and he left us way, way, way too young, way too early. But my goodness, Frisky is the real name of Kitty from Diminish. And unfortunately, Kitty also left us at the end of 2023. It's been barely more than 2 years now. And so when, sorry if this is how you're finding out, but in Diminish, when Will reveals that Kitty has passed on, that was 1-to-1 exactly when it happened with Frisky. So we were both dealing with that at the same time, but Will was dealing with, in a tougher way than I was because of what Will was going through at the time, which he hasn't revealed yet. You have another question after this that will be pertaining to this. He wasn't able to be there with Kitty like I was with Frisky. And so that's one of the things where, like, Will and I are the same person dealing with the same things, but our life situations have diverged at a certain point. And yes, I do have a sister. She's not a twin sister, and thankfully she is still alive and well. And I've been able to have her in my life my entire life. And I was lucky enough to have her tormenting me for my entire childhood. Shout outs to Liz. I love her very much. And, like, in a way, it's very, very easy for me to put myself in Will's shoes and sort of live the life of a version of me that lost Liz. And think of Hamilton what you will, but I resonate with this line very much. I imagine death so much, it feels more like a memory. And Diminish is kind of like a case study of that for me. I have thought about death so much and intimately and invasively throughout my entire life that it feels like I've had all the experiences that Will has had and that Teddy is having as she's guiding us through what it's like to be dying, because I feel like I know what it's like because I think about it so much. So that's most of what I can think about to answer that first question for now. Franco Danko had another bonus question. Will there ever be a good in-universe reason why the series is taking so long? Yes, absolutely. This is a slow burn where Will has been hinting through little things he said and through what is like happening to him right now that is happening off camera that he's not really talking about yet, where it's going to become a bit more clear. I don't know if he's going to divulge everything because that would be really, really intense and probably unbelievably long-winded, but you're gonna get some clues. And this is something that I kind of want to talk about more like as a post-mortem after the series, at least this part of the series, has already been completed and is out there in its full form. But this series was always meant to sort of teach people about this part of life, about how to deal with this, about how to wait, about how to sit in not knowing, how to sit in stagnance, and how to move on while things are not really moving on, and while that's kind of impossible in a lot of different ways. Because I think that part of experiencing loss as close as Will has experienced it is that years will just disappear, even if you're not going through what he's been going through in his life lately. That's all I'll say on that for now. Thank you so much for your questions. Cthulhish starts out their question kind of with some things that I've touched on in some of my other answers, but says, do you actively seek out things that you could draw inspiration from for Diminish? And is there anything you've looked into or really enjoyed recently that you think may influence it in the future, or that you directly want to draw from? Now, there's so many things. When you like put it that way, there's so much. I can't possibly remember all of it, or maybe even remember any of it, because it's just like, it's an avalanche on me right now. So maybe in a way that can serve to kind of answer you, because yes, kind of like every single day that I encounter things, it influences Diminish, because again, Diminish is just kind of a different way of me living out my life and presenting who I am and what I am and what I'm thinking in the moments of my recordings and when I'm making the game. So absolutely every single day that I live is influencing Diminish. So it's hard to pin like little individual things down. In terms of research, like, yes, there's a lot of research that I should have done already that I didn't do, especially when I started the series. I need to tell you a little story about how freaking lucky I am. So at the beginning of Diminish, in episode 1, where Will is talking about how he would sit down with Teddy and he would be playing games as she would be watching and cackling and pointing and laughing, he mentions that she would watch him play games like I Want to Be the Guy. So before I did that recording session, I was intending for him to say she would watch me play games like I Want to Be the Guy and Celeste. I forgot to include Celeste when I was recording the episode. This is looking like it's gonna be patterned after like Celeste or I Want to Be the Guy. Controls kind of like Celeste a little bit. And you know what? That might have been a good thing, because Teddy died in 2016 before Celeste was out. I believe that is what they refer to as dodging a bullet. That kind of plays into the fact that I thought this was just going to be a little thing that I did for me and that nobody was really going to watch. I would put it around here and there on social media just in case. Maybe you could find a small audience of like die-hard Unfiction fans that might appreciate it. That was the extent of what I thought would happen. Like 10 people being like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. So I didn't feel the massive pull for intensive research like I started to once the series started to pick up massively more amounts of popularity than I ever dreamed of. And that's, again, part of why it feels so tough to think about these days, because I feel a logarithmically expanded amount of demand for what I need to put into Diminish, correlating to the amount of attention it now has and the amount of impact that it has had on people. So I'll say I've done a lot more research on a lot of different things as the series has gone on, especially as the stakes felt higher with more and more and more people connecting with it. In terms of like actively seeking out things specifically to draw inspiration from for Diminish, I don't really do that. No, I don't really try to experience art for any ulterior reason. I don't really try to do anything when I consume art. I just kind of watch things and read things, and whatever happens, happens. Because I have always tended to have bad experiences with just about anything, but even as like a casual observer or audience member or viewer or listener of something, when I sit down to do it for a purpose, for like a specific like homework task. So I try to avoid that if I can. Vanilla Zilla saying, have you ever thought more about Act 1, Episode 14? I personally think that episode was made incredibly well when I first watched it on my own. Yes, that has been kind of synonymous with me thinking about Diminish most of the time. That is one of the parts of the series that really took on its own life and had a massive amount of discourse around it. Well, massive, I mean, in relative terms for Diminish itself. For those who never knew or need a reminder, Diminish Act 1, Episode 14 is one of the more controversial and more discussed episodes of Diminish. In this episode, Will uncovers some physical artifacts that Teddy left behind, which included a cheat code for him to try out, which she warns him about in the writings, but he tries it out because he's at his wit's end with some fake floors. Teddy! And once he puts in the cheat code, he discovers some very disturbing, even more disturbing elements that are arising from the game, including some real-life pictures of real-life terrible occurrences and murderers. The insinuation is that this was put in when Teddy was going through a particularly rough emotional period during what is a very rough general emotional time of dying very, very young, and she's coping with the world that she's leaving behind, which she's feeling particularly pessimistic about in terms of the human condition, the state that the world is in, the way that humanity is, and just this is kind of her doing some very ugly screaming through the game. And you know, a lot of people vied with it, a lot of people really didn't, and thought that it was insensitive, thought that it was kind of immersion breaking in a way. A lot of people took it as shock value for the sake of shock value. But there were an infinite amount of ways that people took it. Every single person, as always, processes art differently in any case, and this was no different. And this being one of the more divisive points in the series, you saw more passionate responses, positive and negative. And it was really tough for me to deal with for a while, because I saw truth to every response, and I saw things that I didn't agree with in most responses, because that's just what happens whenever you make some of your most raw art. Only you know exactly what it means to you. And whenever it is that raw and emotional and, in a way, that shocking, whether you intended it to be or not, it's going to mean something largely different to everyone. They're going to have a large response to it. And it was tough for me to kind of reconcile and sort of sit with all of those responses, especially the more negative ones, and especially the ones that assumed that I was meaning something kind of disingenuous through it, and I, was irresponsible in making the episode the way that I did. And soon after the episode came out, I did make a video kind of delineating my feelings going into it and around it, and it's one of the more viewed videos on this channel, and looking back at it, I feel like it was kind of imprecise. I'm not super fond of it. And so I'm going to address it again and sort of try to be a bit more detailed about how I exactly feel when I look back at it. So I've stated, including in that previous video, that I made that video to survive some tough feelings that I was going through at the time. And plenty of people were able to cross-reference the date of that published video and kind of put together that what I might be referring to is a world event or a national event, which was the January 6th civilian invasion of the US Capitol. And a lot of how I have felt in expressing myself, both in the actual video of Diminish Act 1, Episode 14, and in expressing my feelings after the fact up till now, I felt like I've kind of presented too simple of a picture, because a lot of my feelings and a lot of what came out in the video and when I was talking about it in the past, when I was younger and maybe kind of less formed about all of this, doesn't fully scratch the surface of the more complex reality behind all of it. If you watch the video Diminish Act 1, Episode 14, you might just assume the episode is about, yeah, murderers are bad. The world is so shocking and cruel because it has murderers in it, and people die because humans have killed people. Wow, that's so deep, right? And similarly, if you hear me say I made that episode to survive some terrible feelings I was having during the same time as the January 6th events, you might just assume, oh, it's because this person is on the political left and that's all it means. And you might be able to pretty easily assume where a lot of my politics lie, but that is so far from the full truth of why it was tough for me. I wasn't despairing because, oh, people with different political views than me exist and they're doing things. It was because it was a perfect example to me, not just the January 6th events themselves, but the world's response to all of it and everything that happened in the fallout. It was all a perfect presentation to me of one of my biggest points of despair throughout the last several years of my life as I've tried to learn how to live with it, which is everybody lives in different realities and people will never, ever, ever agree on the same realities, and everyone will always try to push their own realities on other people, and there will always be massive discord among massive groups of people, and that freaking kills me inside, and I'm trying to get better about it, and I think I've made some steps, but I have always been a massive people pleaser. And that has always culminated throughout my life in this sort of general sense of, I just want everybody to be able to get along. And if I don't create a world by the time that I've left this world where people are more able and more likely to get along and know how to at least understand each other or learn how to agree to disagree, then I have failed. And so the whole January 6th situation was kind of a massive reminder that I'm a fool, and I always have been. And that's never, ever going to be a direction that the world is capable of going in, a human-dominated world. It was never just, oh, this political group did this, and I am of this political group, so I'm sad. It was, humans just will never get along, ever. And that's what me and Teddy were so upset about. The thing about being in a very vulnerable emotional state, especially when you're in a bit of an incendiary emotional state, is that you express yourself imperfectly, and you generally just are very imperfect in the way that you lead yourself through those times, even more so than you might be generally. So me and Teddy, in our fit of devastated rage, just kind of grabbed at the closest, lowest hanging fruit to kind of symbolize the depths of our feelings, and that happened to be a sort of sad Satan-esque art piece where we harken back to events that we felt like maybe a significantly large amount of people can agree are negative things that have happened in the world, because you can never take that as a given. I went for, like, yes, these people are murderers, these people are child murderers, these people are serial killers, because I kind of assumed that maybe not just one political side will see that as a bad thing. So yes, I guess in a way I was trying to achieve shock as one effect from the art, but I wasn't trying to really manipulate anything out of the people that were watching. I was just trying to deal with my own feelings, and that's exactly what Teddy was trying to do. So this is similar to the way I've already explained myself a million times. In that sense, that answers your question in a very long-winded way. I feel in some ways similar to how I've always felt, where I will always feel like I'm going to explain myself the same way. I just hope to be able to do it more concisely and be able to express the things beneath the surface, because the surface is like that very base level kind of shock value-y presentation. But it felt way more complex to me. It's a far more lifelong and nebulous pain that, as someone who just is desperate for world peace and happiness for as many people as possible, it's something that I'm always in pain over. In short, I've begun to make peace with Act 1, Episode 14. I still feel as strongly as I ever have about it, as you can tell. And yes, I still want to explain myself in a semi-defensive way, although I will always very truthfully tell you that the people who might believe that I was insensitive in bringing up truly horrible real events that happened to real people, and I'm kind of being invasive toward those people and their loved ones, I can understand that. I truly do. And I can't really defend myself for that, and I shouldn't. The one thing I will tentatively say is that Diminish, being an unfiction, exists in the real world with our real world history. And so every event that has happened to us in our history has happened in Diminish. And it's something that Will, as a character, that I could just think about at any time, and that could come out through what I'm saying, through what Teddy says, either through the dialogue or through the events or assets of the game. There will always be a risk of there being things in Diminish that are in the real world. And some of those things might be really uncomfortable. And part of me does regret Act 1, Episode 14 in a way. There's a part of me that regrets Diminish, period. But in that same breath, I'm starting to really come to peace with it and come to terms with it. And all in all, I made it, it's out there, and it's okay. Thank you for your question, VanillaZilla. Next question from Lixian Prime, or Apollo themselves, asking what was it like making the game and having to act like you haven't seen it. I touched on that a bit earlier. In a way, it kind of felt like I hadn't seen it before, because I was almost beta testing as I was playing, and because the game window itself felt like such a different environment than the editor. But of course, it's still not completely the same as a complete first play of a game you've absolutely never seen before. It was a really unique thing. I really enjoy it. I think it's kind of a fun and rewarding way to create a really unique game experience for yourself that you can't really get any other way. Apollo also asks, also, were the bugs intentional or accidental? A bit of both. Some of the bugs I did discover in the brief testing that I did do before actually doing recording for the episodes, and so I would either anticipate that I would be running into them, or I wouldn't necessarily try to get around any of them. I would try to kind of like hold my reaction from when I first saw it, and then just kind of delay my actual feelings about it until experiencing it during recordings. But as you might be noticing, like, glitches are starting to become a bit of a theme for the series, and Act 2 is going to be playing around with glitches a bit more before it's all said and done, so I'm excited about that. Hopefully you enjoy it. Thank you so much for your question, Lixian Prime / Apollo. Smonchko asks, questions. How much of the story did you plan in advance? Just the general beats, or is there a 100-page script somewhere? Good question. The planning is really piecemeal. Like, some things are like actually scripted out. I have some little game design ideas written out, some little pieces of game and plot devices to further develop. Like, there are a couple that I almost feel like I've written myself into a hole with. Like, there are some empty slots in the pause screen for abilities for Apollo, and then there's a couple of other features that we haven't seen visited in a while, and it's like, I've introduced that, now I've really got to take it somewhere, which is an interesting feeling because of the nature of Diminish and the circumstances of it being made by a dying person who doesn't have much time. She's introducing all these things. She's probably feeling the same thing that I am, where it's like, oh my gosh, I've introduced these elements. Now I've got to take them somewhere, but I'm running out of energy, I'm running out of ideas, but what should I do? And if this were truly realistic, there might be several of those elements that end up being totally unresolved, just some very egregious loose ends that are just left there. But I don't know if I can do that and have people be remotely satisfied. I mean, I could just do it anyway, because Teddy's the one calling the shots, and maybe she just really can't come up with anything. She doesn't want to come up with anything. She doesn't have the time. That is absolutely a valid answer. That's a valid outcome. I don't know if people would accept it, but yes, I have lots of little details planned out on lots of different documents. But as far as like actual things scripted, like in-game dialogue and actual things that Will says, very rarely is that stuff written out in advance. There were only a couple of passages that I read from a page for as Will, and one of them was the moment in Act 1 when Will finally opens up about who Teddy is and what happened to her. That was scripted.
Yeah, the big point. Yeah, the big one. 4 years ago, Teddy was diagnosed with leukemia, stage 4. She had no chance. And then a few months later, she was dead. She was 22. It was absolutely pointless. It will never, ever make sense. Never. It will never make sense. But in that few months, she made this game. Because she had a lifetime worth of art inside her, and this is all she could belt out before she was silenced.
I feel like one other moment was, but I can't remember what it was actually off the top of my head exactly, but that goes to show you there were only like two things. Like the rant that Will goes on in Act 1, Episode 18, completely unscripted. That was just from the heart. I may touch on that a little bit more later if a question makes it become relevant again. I don't want to go off on a big tangent right now. I've already talked your ears off. Thank you all for being here so far. Hopefully I am answering your questions to your liking. Thank you so much, SpongeCo, for your question. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly as well. Egghead Iggy asking, how does it feel knowing that there's a substantial number of people who are a fan of your work? Did you ever go into your creative projects thinking/hoping that would happen? To answer the second question first, I've spent my entire life dreaming about it. Yes. I've always been a person since I can ever remember, chiefly motivated by appreciation and admiration and acceptance. And so, especially when I was younger, I would spend most of my days daydreaming about situations where I created things or did things that were widely and positively received so that I could just bask in the glory. I will never ever try to sell myself as a saint. Let's just say that. In many ways. And I mean, not to say that the desire to be appreciated is some great sin, but the degree to which I pined for that, and it almost became my basis for actualization, even like in my imagination, if nowhere else, was extreme. And it's something that I haven't really worked that hard to try to diminish, to try to pare down a little bit. It's just kind of happened naturally as I've gone through some changes as a person and as I maybe have naturally aged. But yes, I have thought so freaking much about it on just about every front that you can imagine. If I've been interested in something in life, you can bet that I've daydreamed about like being one of the best in the world at it, or creating like this golden standard for it. I used to try. Oh god, I've many times I've like visualized dreamily of there being a Wikipedia page of me being described as a modern day Leonardo da Vinci. I'm such a doofus. So yeah, I'm bad about it. To answer your first question, how does it feel knowing there's a substantial number of people that are a fan of your work? Like I said earlier, in those first 6 months especially, it was all of my dreams come true. It was everything I could have ever wanted, especially being able to live through the events that brought a lot of those people into knowing about Diminish. Nightmare Masterclass, Nightmind, Full Game. Nightmare Masterclass being the first instance of Diminish being boosted by a source that I knew about already was like absolutely perfect. I couldn't have scripted it better because Nightmare Masterclass was the channel that I kind of dreamed most about Diminish being covered by. So when Nightmare Masterclass covered the entirety of Act 1 of Diminish in live streams, that was kind of my soul leaving my body in the best possible way. That was absolutely one of the first times in my life that all of my wildest dreams came true all at once. And then from there, of course, it was all kind of like an avalanche, like a Rube Goldberg machine for a while, where like so many of my dreams came true, like to the point where Tony, the creator of Petscop, also boosted Diminish in a tweet. It's like everything I could have ever dreamed of. And I went through all of my difficulties after that, and it became scary to be known to the degree I was, and to be affecting people to that degree. Will talks about it in Act 2 a little bit, and that feeling of being like an influencer, of kind of like just by existing and just by simply playing a game, like people are almost hanging on your every word and so interested in everything you're doing, and you might not have any idea how you're impacting them in every single moment. Sure, like that can be really complicated to deal with, and yes, that is definitely part of it, especially for somebody as sensitive and people-pleasing and wildly steeped in every single facet of morality as me. But still, the general answer is that I am impossibly honored and delighted, and I can't describe how freaking cool it is that I can come on to my SeireaSong YouTube channel after Diminish has been barely operational, barely even existing for like 4 years now, and I can post the Q&A announcement raffle video, and then I immediately get like 30 people asking me questions and wanting to participate, because people, like, even after all this time, even after how little I've done, it feels, people still care this much, and Diminish has already made its impact in a lot of ways, and that is so special. Thank you so much for your question, Iggy. I'm bouncing back and forth between the YouTube questions and the questions that people asked in the Diminish fan server. I poke my head in there every now and then. It's, again, because of the nature of Diminish being an unfiction, and because I'm so afraid of hurting people by peeking too much through the curtain from my side. I'm not super active and super vocal in places like that, but shoutouts to the Diminish server. Shoutouts to Magic Ace, who created it way back in the day. That was another moment where it's like, all my dreams are coming true. Somebody wants to create a Diminish server, and it's not even me. It's one of my fans. I have fans? Are you kidding me? And here it is all these years later with so many people in it. My goodness gracious. Anyway, a question here from The Collector. What would have happened if Will completed Act 1 with the cheat code, the one showing all the disturbing images in Act 1, Episode 14, on? I love this question because it's one that I've never really considered. I love things that make me think about Diminish in a way I never have before. If I were to come up with an answer right now, it's one that might not surprise a lot of people if you've gotten a good sense of who Teddy is. If he had actually gone through with it and gone to like that wall with like the really tiny shaft that was so awkward to try to climb without falling back down into the spikes, I feel like Teddy would have programmed it such that if the cheat code were on and he crossed a certain point in that shaft, then it would have been a death plane and it would have killed him, sent Apollo all the way back to the first checkpoint, and there would have been a message where she said, "You know we're not doing it like that. Like, you silly little bitch. You thought you could get through cheating. Like, thank you for listening to my screams. Now do it again the real way, you little shit." Thank you so much for your question, The Collector. Moving on to some questions from Justin Doesn't Look At. Obviously, grief is a big part of the series, but since it's been so long since the series started, do you feel or reflect differently on those sorts of things now? I think that's a great question. I have to think about it a little bit. And yeah, like with things occurring like Frisky or Kitty's passing, lots of different world events. Man, a lot has happened since the series began in late 2020. Holy cow. In a broad sense, I'm in a pretty similar place about all of it, I think. There are going to be little things here and there where I have a bit more or different perspective. Again, like because I have lost more loved ones since then. But I've also gained more loved ones, you know, partially because of Diminish and the people that I've met and even fallen in love with since and as a result. And so that's given me way different perspective in my life. I am in some ways a very different person than I was when Diminish started, but in some ways, in a lot of crucial ways, I'm right around in the same place that I was. The next question is, how are things logistically or mechanically with creating the series? Obviously, tools like Godot or Godot have been changing so much in that time period. With Godot specifically, I have not been taking any looks at like the new versions, especially like the completely step up versions that change everything, because I know it would overwhelm me, especially with programming and like the interfacing with game design. I reached burnout in like 2017 with that, and so I'm basically working on 8-year-old knowledge when it comes to all of that, because I know that if I tried to switch things up in that regard, that would just knock me over like a fart in the wind. So I try to keep to a lot of the same processes that I started doing the series with. I still use Sprite in that interface is basically the same. I still use Clip Studio Paint for the non-sprite work. I still use the same Producer Edition FL Studio 12. It's hard to kind of explain how things are mechanically and logistically. I just do it. I just do it the way I've always created things. 31 years of wanting to create and wanting to make things, all just coming to a head. In a way, that's a lot of what Diminish is, and it's me trying to do it in as minimalist of a result as I possibly can so that it actually happens. And part of why it's taking so long is because, again, like I mentioned before, the more eyes and attention and emotional attachment that Diminish receives, the more I feel like I should be putting into it, which is antithetical to what should be happening, because Teddy's time is running out and she's running out of energy as well. And she only had a limited amount of skill set to work with, so I need to stay true to that. And that also goes into answering that question. Like, I have to try to pare things back as much as possible and intentionally limit myself in the creation process with everything. Justin's last question is, what is your favorite piece of music you've made for it? Mine is the Shelley phone piano music. So the first thing that jumps to my head is actually Surviving Overcast. That one flies under the radar for a lot of people because it kind of lives in the shadow of To Be the Sun and A Shore Challenge, which are like the big, rousing, spirited, energetic, and high production, in a way, tunes, even though both of them were done in not that long of time. I also quite like the Shelley phone piano music. I love a lot of the incidental stuff because a lot of that is just me kind of playing around with jazz harmonies, and like using the minimalism to the most effect that I can, and that's really fun. And a lot of those only take like 20 minutes to make, and it's just so satisfying. I love making those, and then I love revisiting them. But Surviving Overcast also only took about 2 hours at most to make, because it used a lot of the shell of the same file as To Be the Sun. It just took out some instruments and moved a couple of things around and added like one part, and it's basically just kind of like a reskin of To Be the Sun that completely alters the feel and the mood, and I love how moody it is. It just feels great to me, and one of my absolute favorite things in music is counter melody and ostinato, and Surviving Overcast really emphasizes all of that. I am also partial to Beneath the Gold Exterior, which is the name of the tune that plays in the Apollo statue. That one took so long to flesh out. I was sitting on the first 30 seconds of that tune for about 3 years, and then I was finally able to flesh it out. And that is, again, that's a little insight into what this has been like, this entire project. Some things happen in an hour or 20 minutes. Some things take like 4 years for me to figure out. Creation. Thank you so much for your questions, Justin Doesn't Look At. Caps Lock, or Caps Low, asking, all I'm really wondering is, why is Apollo a wolf? And this will lead into another question from somebody else. So, the game protagonist of Diminish was initially going to be an elf girl character, reminiscent of, at the time I was massively obsessed with the Netflix series The Dragon Prince. So kind of reminiscent of Rayla from that show. And this was in like the day or two after I first got the idea for Diminish, and I was able to recognize like really quickly, really early on, that I was being drawn into a different direction. And so I followed it pretty much right away. And I know that the furry community is very happy that I did. Apollo is a wolf or wolf-type creature because I have been very drawn to that type of design in characters like Lucario or Zoroark, that type of motif in Pokemon, like a canine bipedal creature that isn't quite a regular like wolf. It's like they've got some sort of monster qualities to them. They've got some like innate danger to their physiology. And so my first like major original character that I was planning to have as the protagonist of my first massively overambitious original game project, I have an original character named Null, who is the member of an original monster species called a Lunaran or Lunaran. I'm still not sure 9+ years later exactly how I want that to be pronounced, and maybe, you know, different cultures can pronounce it differently, and I can have my cake and eat it too. I love to do that. But yes, Null is like a wolf-like monster, like 9 feet tall, and if you take a look at Null, you can see like all of the extremes of what ended up being Apollo. The super skinny midsection, the super pronounced ribs, massive forearms leading into even bigger hands, deeply pronounced and extreme digitigrade legs. And then there's that added danger of those spikes that are attached to his body. I kind of imagine that Null and the Lunarans are like a descendant of the type of being that Apollo is. So Apollo is a wolf kind of because Null is like my first child. And I just couldn't help myself from dipping into that well when creating the protagonist of the game of Diminish. Thank you so much for your question. That actually leads perfectly into a different question with Arluis Salo. Will you be making any side stories that tie in with Diminish? Oh my goodness gracious, I would like to have dozens of them out already. At this point, a lot of my original story ideas that I have been really into as passion projects since way before Diminish was a twinkle in my eye, those are probably going to end up kind of being like Diminish side stories, because Diminish is the first thing that I've made that is popular. Like, it's always going to be awkward now because of the unfiction nature and because of the fragility of people's emotional connections to that being its own thing that exists in its own world. But I have to tell you right now, and this isn't really a spoiler in terms of Diminish the story itself or the series itself, Shelly is an existing character of mine from stories outside of Diminish. I know her real name, and actually some people who knew me well before Diminish know her real name as well, because they saw the original version of her before she experienced the events that placed her where she is in Diminish. So I guess I guess my stories and my worlds have coalesced into a greater Seiria extended universe. And whatever stories come about from that will, in a way, be Diminish side stories. And of course, I also want to make Diminish games and actually have people be able to play Diminish related things. And I don't know if I can actually tie a bow on what we've seen of the game of Diminish in the web series and put that in people's laps, especially because that was kind of just made specifically for Will anyway. So Diminish games would probably be different stories. And so I guess those could also be kind of what you're talking about too. You see how successful I am at actually working on Diminish itself. God knows if I'm ever actually going to be able to release the other stories and be able to frickin' make playable games. But goodness frickin' gracious, I want that. I want that. I want these things to stop being trapped in my head. I want everybody to be able to live in my worlds with me. And to be able to see all of my babies and so that they and their lives and their experiences don't die with me someday. Thank you so much for your question, R. Lewis Sallow. Let's circle back to a question from Trilux. Or Trilux, or Trilux. My brain enjoys looking at character designs and gleaming things from that. So, will we ever get a pre-Diminished design for Apollo when they had the muscles they love to talk about? Or maybe even something from Artemis, perhaps? I have taken a few stabs at drawing a super buff version of Apollo in some live streams years ago, and that was when my general quality of art was way below what I'm satisfied with. They're probably sitting around somewhere. They're probably also even in this channel's archived live streams. There is a playlist that I have on this channel of all of my old live streams from like the end of Diminish Act 1 up till like, I don't know, at least half a year after that, where I did a ton of live streams. I made them all unlisted so that I didn't clutter up the channel, because at the time, there wasn't really as much of an organized way for live streams to sit in their own space in the channel, and so I felt like they were just cluttering up my video feed, and so I made them all unlisted. But they're all available in that playlist, and I'm sure that one of the things that I drew in one of those streams, at least once, was an attempt at a buff Apollo that is now at a drawing quality that I now massively cringe at. I'm so freaking lucky that most of what I made in Diminish at the time, late 2020, when I was still in a big improvement phase as an artist, and most of what I made I was really dissatisfied with, most of what came out for Diminish I'm still happy with. I'm so lucky. My best work just happened to come out for that series. But yes, there are some imaginings floating around, and also in the recent episodes of Act 2, there are a couple of flashbacks, some visions that we have seen of Apollo's past, where you can actually get a peek of Apollo and a little bit of somebody's back next to him, them. So I guess there already is an official depiction of what Apollo looked like before they lost their strength and their muscle mass in the events leading up to the beginning of this series. It might not be as extreme as what a lot of people would be expecting, and even as what I was going for when I was kind of idly drawing that years ago. Oftentimes, we are our own worst critics, and bodies are so strange, and oftentimes we see some of the biggest changes that other people can't even discern at all. So I ended up kind of feeling like the general shape of Apollo isn't that different from what it was when he was near his peak. I keep calling him a he right now. I always alternate. I usually go with they, especially when I'm typing, but it's interesting. So yeah, we have seen pre-Diminish events Apollo so far. We might get to see more in the future. We'll see. We'll see. And as far as Artemis is concerned, things have definitely been building up there, and you're certainly going to have to just wait and see when it comes to Artemis. Thank you so much for your question, Trilux. The next question is from Malty LaFay, which I have already mostly answered. What's your creative process like for the series? Or in general, I just love to hear about your creative process or how you go about writing and developing something like Diminish. I just kind of follow the wind, and if I'm feeling like making music, I'll make music. If I'm feeling like doing sprites and animations, that's what I'll do. If I'm just walking around outside and a writing idea hits me, I will jot it down. If I'm feeling ready to tackle some of the game editor stuff and programming, then I'm going to sit down and try to lock in. It's all so in flux. Like, all of the elements are always orbiting me, and sometimes whenever it's difficult to even think about the series, they're orbiting really far away and I can't really reach anything. But if I can sense that one of the elements is orbiting close enough for me to reach, or if it even orbits so close that it's just touching me without me even having to try, then that's what I go for, and I sit down and I have some fun. As you might imagine, like, doing all of the different types of media by myself and having access to all of those tools is extremely exciting and fun, and can be one of the thorns in my side and one of the toughest things about trying to do all of this. So far, it's been mostly extremely rewarding and fun, and I'm kind of looking forward to watching the series again from the beginning and trying to kind of experience all of what I was able to make, and not just kind of like be overwhelmed by the pure emotion and intensity of the series itself. Thank you so much for your question, Malty LaFay. And that leads pretty well into the next question by Dr. Pepper PhD, saying, for sure relate to what you described in the previous video in letting yourself fall into a creative lull. So that easily leads me to a question I've had in mind for a while. What are some of the biggest difficulties you face in the process of creating Diminish? A lot I've already touched on, the emotional difficulty of so many people having encountered the series and having their own incredibly intense and unique feelings and responses and attachments. And so a lot of that feels like a huge heavy weight on my shoulders and on my heart. The fact that even though I've tried to keep things minimalist, there's a giant mountain of what I've already worked on that's sitting there that I now have to try to kind of push forward and work with all the different elements. And so with basically every episode that I make, there's more and more work to be done for the next one in a way. And I have to do every single avenue and angle of every single media type, with the art and the music and the writing and the game design and programming and just about everything you can think of, because I do everything in the series with only one other person really having a look into the process before episodes are released, which is my editor, H. So it can just feel impossible to even think about because of the amount of energy it can take these days, and the pressure that comes along with it being a relatively popular series these days, at least in terms of viewership. The moments of backlash have been really, really difficult. Like, there are times when I had emotional reactions to things people said, so I think once about the series itself, and then sometimes some things that people said to other viewers, and I would have emotional reactions and then regret it very soon after. There are so many times that I wish that I just had never, typed anything ever in my life. I think, honestly, a lot of those are the main difficulties. I'm trying to think of other things. I know there have to be more. Oh, there are actually some ideas that I have that feel very difficult to even begin taking steps toward making possible. Like, I don't want to even bring them up, because if I say I want to take the step toward making this happen, then it would kind of reveal something that I really want to be a surprise if I can make it happen. There are difficulties with being the only one working on everything, but there's so much difficulty in me even thinking about doing what I've never done before in trying to employ other people. Which people I would be employing and in what ways I'd be employing them, I will leave a mystery. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your question, Dr. Pepper PhD. Pause is cool, asking, what are the key binds for Diminish? Speaking of backlash, let me tell you, WASD, for A and B, I use the period key and the pause key, respectively. Enter for start. I think select does stuff. I'd have to actually remember that. But there's another button that just inexplicably does stuff. The Z key. Remember the Z key? And remember how Will didn't remember the Z key? And there was backlash for that episode because people thought that was so unrealistic that somebody would just not use a key that he had used like 3 times before in only very specific situations. And he had absolutely no reason or context with which to find out that he should use it to experience like a secondary effect in Act 2. I'm very amused by that at this point. It was upsetting at first, and it upset Will a lot. He rambled about it for like 20 minutes in the next episode because it really touched a nerve for him. And that's the type of person I am too. People don't understand what it's like for somebody this neurodivergent to miss things that are right in front of them so often in life. And things that like aren't necessarily right in front of them that other people kind of perceive as being obvious. That was also the case in Act 1, Episode 18, where Will was trying out something that apparently everybody else in the world had thought of, and even as Will was trying to do what they were saying, everybody was freaking out because he was doing it the wrong way, because I have a lot of gaps in my brain in how I perceive the world compared to what is supposed to be obvious, and that's just the reality of my life. And not many people will understand that if that's not the reality of their lives.
Wait. Okay, never mind. Why am I trying to attack it? I'm not a very good critical thinker, guys.
There is something I find interesting to note about this as I was editing this, so I searched up the comments section to look for some of the comments that indicated that people were upset with the mind-boggling nature of Will not encountering the speaking to Apollo mechanic by pressing the Z key in the ocean. And actually all I ran into were just the 2 comments that I showed as this segment began. That was illuminating. To preface what I'm about to hopefully briefly get into, in case you didn't watch the previous video that announced this Q&A, part of why I'm knocking on the door of coming back to working on this series and getting fully ingrained into the process is because I feel the healthiest I've felt either in a long time or in my entire life in several regards. For the past 4 years or so, I've felt like a nuclear wasteland creatively and energy-wise, but possibly a more important and bigger and overarching reason why I'm trying to come back is because emotionally, mentally, I am probably the healthiest I've ever been in my entire life, thanks probably mostly in part to a configuration of medications that is by far the most effective that I've ever experienced after, 15 plus years of trying. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because throughout, even when I was still very active with Diminish early on and still experiencing so many of the joys of it gaining popularity, I was, at the best of times, incredibly mentally and emotionally unstable. And this situation here, where I realized that me feeling like the Z key situation was something that garnered this immense backlash that like made people feel like it ruined the series, like the people that did bring it up didn't nearly go that far. It was all in my head. It really highlights how much I lived in delusions for basically my entire life, and it's still kind of a part of me, but it's all so much more muted and controllable. So I just wanted to clear the air there and make sure I was covering the full story. I looked back, and I'm starting to realize that so much of what I was having difficulties with, it was real, but it was so much more overblown in here. Oh my freaking goodness. And just about everybody noticed that, and most people seemed to identify with it and relate to it and understand it, and some other people were like, chill out, what is your deal? And yeah, I mean, in both cases, like, the fact that it happened at all, where it would take someone like me 377 hours to press a button, that is a very real thing that I do not regret having as a part of the series, where I'm making statements like that and almost kind of enacting social experiments in the process. But also just Will and I, and Teddy and I, and everybody in the series being who we are is also very much the heartbeat of everything that is Diminish. I'm really looking forward to Will's comeback here. Oh, it's exciting me now that I've gone through my changes. I don't know if you were expecting that much of an answer to what are the key binds for Diminish, but I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for asking that. Pause is cool. Wolf O' the Woods with a couple of questions, starting with a non-Diminish question. Does it hurt to trick on grass after it frosts in the winter? So I actually, in especially my first several months of tricking, I really started seriously training in November of 2010, and I am in the Northern Hemisphere, in the northeastern part of the United States. And so, of course, I live in a place where it gets very cold and snowy and icy in the winter. But I was so unbelievably obsessed and devoted that it didn't matter to me at all. It didn't matter how much snow was on the ground, how slippery it was, how cold it was outside. I would put on shoes or boots. I would shovel off spaces if it was too mired in snow to really move around. Or I would just deal with it, and I would just train. I would just throw myself into my tricks. And sometimes the snow helped me to go for some tricks that were too scary for me to throw on regular ground. And so there was actually something of an advantage sometimes in a weird way, because tricking involves a lot of getting over fears, like little fears, big fears. There's so many tiny little micro progressions that you have to make all the time if you're going to try to keep moving forward. And I was absolutely obsessed with moving forward every single training session. I wanted to be the fastest progressing tricker in the world, and I had to do it in the cold season when I didn't have very much access to gymnastics facilities with indoor spring floors. And it all paid off. I did become one of the fastest progressing trickers at the time. I became far eclipsed in later years, but man, the kids are so freaking good now. So does it hurt to trick on grass after it frosts in the winter? Not if you're wearing the appropriate footwear, and sometimes it hurts even less because the ground can be a bit softer if there's a little bit of snow there, and you don't slip and hurt yourself that way, which thankfully I never did. The Diminish question from Wolf O' the Woods. How do you develop the world or world building of Diminish? Creatures, settings, lore we don't have yet. And what is or was your workflow like while producing it? Spread out bursts of energy, 30 minutes every day, etc. So, first question. Usually, the world building and lore just happen as I'm creating the episodes. A lot of the world building and lore doesn't happen in my pre-planning. It's not written down places. Very little of it is. That's been some of the most fun that I've had while creating Diminish, is the stuff that has just happened as I'm working on it. That's all incredibly spur of the moment and spontaneous. Especially Act 1 of Diminish was 90% spontaneity. Like Act 1, Episode 9, which is probably one of my favorite episodes of the entire series, if not my favorite, was completely unplanned. I just sat down, I was like, okay, so Act 1, Episode 8 just happened, oh my gosh, now what? And the Act 1, Episode 9 was just my answer. It was my real-time answer. And that's mostly how I'm approaching the world building and lore of the series so far. When it comes to the future of the series and what I'm building to, I think some of that I'm going to have to be coming up with ahead of time, and some I already have. I've had like 4 years to do it with how long Act 2 has been mostly stagnant. So now I have some pre-planned world building and lore that I'm waiting to get to. And some of it has actually taken this long to connect all of the dots with, so that it's actually cohesive enough for me to act on. So I have experienced both completely opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of this is happening because it's spontaneous, and this cannot happen until it's completely set in stone. As far as my workflow while producing it, it is almost always spaced out bursts of energy. That is basically how I go with most creative endeavors in my life. I am so ADHD. Diagnosed, treated to various success. There are some medications like help me in the moment, but the crash in the nighttime is so brutal. But yes, for basically everything I've ever done in my life creatively and beyond, it has always been spaced out bursts of energy, sometimes lasting up to weeks, and so I always frickin' burn out. That's part of what has happened to Diminish as well. I burn out on basically everything that I do at length because of the way that the work just tends to happen with me and always has. One more question from Wolf O' the Woods. How did you get synaptic construction sounding so much like blood pounding in your head? Let's take a look and see. Okay, so here we have the FL Studio file for synaptic construction, last saved on November 6th, 2020, more than 5 years ago. There is exactly one active instrument here called the machine. And to answer your question, it is all this instrument. Let me see if I can even find where I got it from inside. Look at all these freaking sound fonts. I'm guessing that it was from this 808 sound fonts folder that I just found on Google a billion years ago. 804 sound fonts, my bad. All right, go to T. Look at how many freaking... there are 804 instruments in here. The tabula... The machine. Here it is right here. Okay, so here's synaptic construction. This is the entire file. This is the entire tune. Just one instrument with stacked sounds and different volumes, initial volumes, and then the channel volume is all the same the entire time. It's just... It starts out with the one layer... And then you hear it build a little bit because we've added another layer. Here's the next one. More layers, more. A lot of the tunes in Diminish are just this. Just me finding a sound file, just finding a sample that it's like, oh, that's an interesting sound. What can I do with it? And just playing. Just spending 15-20 minutes coming up with a little proof of concept for what can be done with a sound. And I just wait for a point in the series where it feels like it fits. And it just so happened that Broken Meadows, in its initial presentation, was the perfect place to be the soundtrack of synaptic construction. So part of the discomfort might be just the sheer intensity of the layering. This might be too extreme of taxing of the speakers and of the interface. Oh my gosh, yeah, so this is the maximum amount of layering. There you go. Synaptic construction. That's how I did it. So, yeah, many of my files that are just lying around for Diminish, not to spoil or anything, I'm not going to show any of them in case they come up later, but I'll just scroll and throw random instruments into the interface and just like test out the pitches and listen for sounds that interest me in one way or another, and then maybe I'll try a couple of different things with them. I'll try some rhythms, I'll try some different pitches, I'll try some orientations, and 10 or 15 minutes later I might end up with an atmospheric incidental track, or maybe even something strangely fleshed out. So shoutouts to the people who made the 804 sound fonts thing. I don't know much about it, and thank you. I have so many folders that I've found on Google through the years. I hope that answers your question. Maybe it surprises people. And hopefully this goes to show you, you don't have to be a musical genius to create soundtracks for your projects, unfiction, video games, whatever. Just be willing to experiment with sound, be willing to have an open mind, and be willing to search for things. If you find fun in that kind of scientific process, then you can create cool musical tracks. Thank you so much for all of your questions, Wolf o' the Woods. Our next questions are from Assistance Importer, saying, any scrapped content or stuff that didn't make the cut that you'd be willing to share? Oh man, most of what I think of kind of just sort of comes out of the pen or through the keys into the series. I need to actually like physically look back and see. In post, I will look through some of the graphics and documents and things that I have sitting around and see if there are things that I haven't used yet that I'm never planning on using, and maybe I'll show some of that right now. And if nothing happened just now, then that means that there is nothing that I've made that I haven't used or don't plan to use. Hope that helps. Assistance Importer has another question. How much has audience participation, i.e. comments, affected Diminish? Was Act 1, Episode 8 always planned or inspired? It was mostly inspired by the YouTube comment. Yeah, it definitely was not always planned. I don't necessarily think that I never would have naturally had Will check to the left because it's an option that he hadn't considered yet, but I think that the comment made it happen at a perfect time, at a very logical time. So in short, it didn't necessarily only happen because of the comment, but the comment definitely inspired it to happen at that time. I got caught up in answering the latter part of the question and forgot about the rest of it. How much audience participation or comments have affected Diminish in general? Not too much, bits and bits here and there, where I feel like it's natural because of Will just looking at comments and seeing things come in and organically reacting to things. Like I mentioned earlier, Act 2, Episode 6 is basically what it is because of the comments that were upset about Will not pressing the Z key in the ocean earlier. And for a long time, I actually massively regretted that episode and thought that it kind of tanked the quality of the series a little bit at that point, and I was really tempted to take it down or release an abridged version. But I will say, as of recent developments and recent ideas that have taken this long to come together, I'm very glad I didn't, because now you'll see. Thank you so much for your questions, Assistance Importer. Our next question is from Heinrich Mutt. What gave you the inspiration for Apollo and his story that's been shown so far? So visually, some of the inspiration for Apollo has already been shown through Null and some of my other mentions of that sort of monster-like canine bipedal design. In terms of a more holistic explanation about more about Apollo, like who they are as a person and the mythology behind them, I've always naturally had a bit of an interest in different types of theology, especially Greek and Roman mythology, because in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade I was lucky enough to be chosen and included for whatever reason in gifted kid classes, and a lot of what was covered in those classes involved that type of mythology, and so I was partially raised with some of that knowledge, and it's just sort of been swirling around in me ever since. For whatever reason, pretty early on, I just landed on Apollo being the name of the creature that I landed upon as the design for what ended up being Apollo. And then once I realized that I liked the name Apollo, within a day or two, I was like, you know what? I might as well lean into this being like an actual god, like the Apollo. That just kind of felt innately exciting to me, and I'm glad that I did that because it feels like it opened up so much runway for me creatively with a lot of what the series is able to explore and already has. And regarding like their story and their background and all of that, again, like a lot of that just comes from me and my experiences and the things that I'm dealing with and thinking about. Like I mentioned before, with a lot of the athletic stuff and how I've been experiencing some degradation in some of that. And just because I've always had my entire life a massive interest in athletics and human capabilities, to the point that I have unwittingly struggled with ableism through my life, where throughout a lot of my life I have subscribed to the belief that any person can do anything, and that's not necessarily a healthy and sensitive approach to apply to every single human being, because a lot of us have very real limitations that I need to actually be mindful of. And in a lot of cases, the limitations can actually lead to their own specific growth and beauty. And that is actually a lens that I've been applying to Apollo, and it's been a theme for them throughout the series and will continue to be. And for many characters in this series. There's another one in particular that I'm thinking of, but I'll let that play out on its own before I yap about it too much in this environment. Heinrich Mutt's next question is, did you plan for the series to have such an emotional impact on people, especially those grieving? In a way, yes and no. Like, throughout this video so far, you've probably been made aware of the cognitive dissonance of something that I've always said, which is, when I first made the series, I never planned for it to have such a big response, for it to actually have people seeing it more than like a couple of my friends and like maybe 5 other people just by happenstance. I genuinely believe that. I had no idea that anybody would actually freaking see it, let alone have it be so widely shared, and then for it to have a large fandom of such devoted people. But then, like, earlier in this video, I was talking about how I was dreaming for Nightmare Masterclass to cover it, and when then Nightmind and Full Game and Sagan Hawks and so many other people shared it, it was all a dream come true, and it was something that I was daydreaming about and hoping for. So this is yet another example of something so incredibly common and prevalent and pervasive in the world, especially with humanity, which is two completely opposing things can and will be true. Cognitive dissonance is baked into everything that we are. I'm just gonna leave that point at that for now, because I could ramble about that for so freaking long. It is such a deep conviction of mine, and there's so much of me orbiting that yeah, let's just move on for now. Did I plan for this series to have such an emotional impact on people? Again, yes and no. No, I wasn't planning for any of this to impact people to the degree that it did, or even close to that. But everything that I do and everything that I make, I want to have a positive impact on people, and I do want my art to move people, always. I think that's a natural thing to want whenever you're creating something and sharing it with the world. And very naturally, to the next point, yes, to those grieving specifically, I always did kind of hope that if that were to come to pass, that somebody who is experiencing such a tough time were to find this, my hope would be that it could help them to the utmost. It wasn't admittedly my main thing that I was thinking about. I was just making something that I had an idea for and I wanted to try it out. But everything that I do in life, I try to do extremely thoughtfully and mindfully with the lowest possible chance of hurting people, which again, that might come off with some cognitive dissonance based on other things that I say and have said even in this video alone, where it's like, yeah, I'm just kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing whatever sticks. But a lot of that involves me having to trust myself, and whenever I am just trying things and just doing things, it comes from the hope that I can employ that mode without innately being a person that is going to create or enact harmful things whenever I just let it rip. In Diminish's case, that still happened anyway, in a way, with Diminish itself, and in some moments here and there throughout the series, like Act 1, Episode 14, that did end up coming to pass here and there, and in some different ways, where I either was a little insensitive unwittingly in my choices, or the nature of the series itself, and especially with it being an unfiction, where people would not know that going in and then find it out later, was inevitably going to cause harm, as much as I desperately do not want that. And those people are always in my thoughts, and I will always feel responsible for it, and I just have to live with it. And I need to be able to keep the people that I've affected positively in my thoughts as well. Not necessarily so that I can like bask in it, like I mentioned earlier, but just because that's important too. And all of those people are important too. I've talked about it at length a billion times, and I will probably do so a billion times more. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you so much for your questions, Heinrich Mutt. Sammy Hurley asks, in a lot of the videos in Act 1, we cut away from runbacks and don't really get to see those moments, but when you get to episode 17, it's a good 30 minutes of runback. It's obvious that the pain of playing the game is an important part of the journey and message. So what made you decide to cut those runbacks out, but keep it all in episode 17? That's how it looks, but I will tell you right now, the reason why there was so much more footage included in episode 17 was because the play session was so much longer than every other episode in Act 1. In episode 17, I spent 5 to 6 hours in one session sitting there smashing my head against the wall. I did not keep everything. I cut a lot out in episode 17. What was included in episode 17 was the moments where my emotional reactions were significant enough and relevant and impactful enough to the overall build of that episode that they were what I decided to put in. I hope that I'm remembering it correctly and I'm not actually lying to you and the attempts counter is going to disprove me. In case that actually does come to pass, I wouldn't be that surprised because I probably wouldn't have even have noticed that I was editing things differently in episode 17 to exemplify the grind even more so in episode 17. Because it made more sense in that episode, because it was like the big climax of the gameplay, of the act itself, and the entire landscape of its story and arc. So maybe a bit of a two-faced answer to cover both possibilities, but there you go. I gave you the answer of how I felt when I was making it, and in case I was wrong about how it actually turned out, that might be why. Okay, so I did do a little bit of digging and a little bit of math, and hopefully what I've come up with actually makes sense and is actually relevant. People who are much better at math than me can at least identify if this has any bearing on the subject at all. Math was always by far my weakest subject, so here we go. For Act 1, episodes 1 through 16, I counted through the different save files 1,093 deaths or tries across 174 minutes worth of gameplay. That works out to about 6.28 deaths per minute. From the end of Act 1, Episode 16, to the point where Will reaches the shaft in what would end up being his successful attempt where he takes no more deaths, we see 130 tries in about 28 minutes of gameplay. That comes out to 4.64 deaths per minute. So you can already notice, yes, that is a difference, and if I'm doing my math correctly and applying it correctly, we can see that the ratio is not 1-to-1. Episodes before Act 1, Episode 17, did seem to skip about 26% more of the deaths. At least there were 26% more deaths per minute, which would suggest that the most likely reason is that I just cut past more deaths. 26% isn't a lot, but it is a fairly significant amount, so you're definitely not off base for thinking that I did cut out more before Act 1, Episode 17. But I am also not wrong in the fact that the session was just really, really long, and I still cut out a decent amount in Episode 17. It did end up that I cut out a little bit less, but not to an exorbitant degree. I really didn't want to just talk out of my butt there. I wanted to do a little bit of science before I just let it fly. Thank you so much for your question, Sammy Hurley. Here's another relatively simple one to answer from SparkyBot, asking, how long was the story or idea of Diminish around in your head before you started making stuff for it? About 3 hours. And a week after the idea first spawned in my head and I first started fleshing it out to my friend H, I made a proof of concept episode. And then about a week after that or so, the first actual episode was published on YouTube and shared. Thank you so much for your questions, SparkyBot. Yona asking, I've always wondered if there was any hidden element that you included in Diminish that nobody caught. Obviously, I wouldn't expect you to say what they are, but I'm curious about your experience with having your writing interpreted, / how close the audience's interpretation of the story and characters was to what you had in mind. There are a couple of little puzzles and codes that either haven't been fully decoded yet or have been decoded here and there by a couple of people but haven't been widely accepted yet. And some of those will be explored more in the series to come. As opposed to other hidden elements that I haven't noticed people catch on to yet, I'll have to actually watch through the series again myself as I get ready to work on it again and see if there's anything, because nothing else jumps to mind right now. Regarding how people have been interpreting the story and characters so far, for the most part, I think people are very, very in tune with my own interpretations. I'm actually very, very surprised that people feel that the series is so accurately and so deeply representing all of the themes that I'm feeling as I'm approaching making the series. There's not enough floof happening right now. I don't necessarily feel like what I'm doing is very deep at all. It's a lot of it, as some people are pointing out, is kind of surface level and easily accessible. And I think that has been able to lend to some of its popularity. Nothing I'm doing is really groundbreaking. It's like, yeah, it may be the first major example of a rage game TGIF game-centered unfiction, but it's a fairly simple web series in its themes and how the themes are presented to the audience. Like, as I said to you just now, sure, there are a few hidden elements here and there, some little things to decode because that is a fun thing to do in unfiction, especially on the ARG side. And some of the horror that I've been applying into the series can create a different sensation and a different flavor to the experience. It does have a fair amount of moving parts, and it is fairly flexible in a lot of its presentation, but its main presentation is quite digestible. And so far, basically everybody has been picking up what I've been putting down, and it's been really fun to watch. Thank you so much for your questions, Yona. Seraph asking, would you say your time speedrunning various titles has influenced the choices you make with the level design in Diminish, and if so, in what ways? Interesting question. My initial feeling is actually not that much, which might come as a surprise. There is sort of an innate and natural speedrunning feel to Diminish's gameplay, mostly just because Apollo moves so quickly, and because the gameplay is built around the responsiveness and the precision. It's a precision platformer. To the degree that Teddy even uses some of the tiny little slivers where spike hitboxes don't exist to give the player a couple of pixels of leeway to land on to make some jumps. That does interest me. I have fun playing a game like that when I'm recording the series. That's not necessarily the type of experience that I usually have in my own gaming life. I absolutely adored the Mega Man Zero franchise and the Mega Man ZX games and a lot of games like that growing up. And I've always found playing that sort of game and coming toward mastery of that level design very satisfying and very rewarding. So I feel like that might have influenced what I've done in Diminish more so than any speedrunning I've done, because especially by the time the series started, I'd only ever really speedrun River City Ransom EX and River City Ransom for the NES, its original version, to that point. And still, at this point, I haven't really gone into really tough precision-based platforming type games as speedruns so far. It's mostly been Kunio-kun franchise games, some other NES games, and beat-em-ups, stuff like that. The gameplay design and level design of Diminish was much more so approached from the standpoint of who is Apollo and how does Apollo move and what does Apollo do, much more so than other game experiences I've had and anything being inspired by other game experiences in that way. It's mostly just been the experience that Teddy wanted to inflict upon Will and just who Apollo is and what Apollo is able to do. Thank you so much for your question, Seraph. I might butcher this one. Salvages, asking, as an unfiction project that comes from a place of truth, how much of yourself as the actor, for Will, is put into the project? Maybe a percentage of how much your own life is injected into the narrative over other people's or cohesive writing. It feels like Will and I are 99% the same person, especially personality-wise, and how we think and how we speak and how we act, but our lives diverged at a certain point, like maybe even right away. Obviously, every single person who has ever existed diverges immediately, like before they're even born. They have different environments even in the womb. So one of my beliefs is that no two people ever in the history of this world, before, now, and after, will ever be even close to the same. But that's very navel-gazy, and it's kind of taken me away from the actual answer here, because we are so similar, Will and I, which is more possible to do through this type of project. But our lives are quite different. The things we've had to go through are quite different. I feel a lot more fortunate in my lot in life than what Will has had. As incredibly lucky as he was to be able to have Teddy in his life and some other people in his life. But it's very interesting to me. You use the word actor, referring to me playing Will. And that idea fascinates me because the vast majority of the time that I'm making and recording Diminish, I don't feel like I'm acting at all. It might be because my given circumstances for the character are so natural to me that it doesn't really feel like I have to get into character, because again, Will and I are basically the same personality. But because our lives are so different and we've had entirely different life events, there's a lot that I have to step into and remember and say that isn't who I am. But that doesn't feel unnatural to me, because I feel like I know Will so well. And I don't know if I can exactly explain why. I just feel comfortable as Will. But if we're going to talk about acting, I did briefly mention Act 1, Episode 18 earlier, where Will goes on a bit of a rant at the end of the episode in response to a soup of the day that strikes a nerve with him. And a lot of what he's been dealing with his entire life with Teddy, but especially since her passing, just kind of all comes out at once, as a lot of her insecurities just came out, and she reveals to him in no uncertain terms that she kind of took all of that to her grave and probably never got over it. And that really bothers him.
Why didn't you focus on yourself first? I could have figured all this out on my own. Why didn't you... I'm gonna be fine, okay? I'm gonna have the time to be okay. Are you listening? Can you hear me? You weren't fucking graded for how you died. You were not given a grade for how gracefully you went. And even if people are doing that right now, even if people are seeing this and they're trying to invalidate you for not being absolutely perfect when you were sad about dying, fuck them. Just let yourself have a moment. Just one. There's not a fucking rubric.
That was one of the only parts of this series that I kind of knew going in and as it began that this was going to be an acting monologue, and I had to actually really make sure I was entrenched in the given circumstances and be able to put on a performance. But even then, I approached it just trying to be my most natural self as possible. I was just trying to talk as I talk. Like, there's just a lot of sighing and a lot of stuttering and falling over words and imperfect speech. And that's part of just what happens whenever you are in a mood like that. And especially that's just how I talk. Like, when I am recording videos like this one right here, you notice that there are a billion cuts because I'm trying to present all of my thoughts as cleanly as possible. This is not how I normally talk. There's usually a lot of empty, dry spaces where I just sort of like look around and try to order my thoughts. I've become incredibly comfortable in front of a microphone in this scenario because I can edit. But in the scene where Will is responding to, I think it was the potato soup of the day, I wanted the strength of that scene to be the rawness and realism of an imperfect person just talking and feeling imperfect feelings. And it was fairly easy to feel his emotions because he was talking to Teddy. I was yelling at myself. A lot of Will's frustrations at Teddy and a lot of the things that she revealed that she never got over were my frustrations at myself and the things that at the time and to this day in a large degree never got over and have never been able to figure out or move on from. All this time you were the one who was listening to them. You were the one who was letting all their bullshit dictate the way that you lived your life. The entire time, it was dictating the way that you lived your death. You died the exact way that they wanted you to. How dare you? God, that's not fair to me. I know that. I know, okay? I know. That's not fair. Because that is the shit that I've been dealing with, isn't it? It's the stuff that you have been telling me my entire life. Who the fuck am I to judge? And again, I'll always be sheepish about how much of this series and the different characters are just me talking to me, about my life. It all feels so freaking selfish, especially when people are connecting with these people as them so much. And then I just reveal, oh yeah, this is all just a vanity project. But it's also so not. That's art. It's way more complicated even when it's as simple as Diminish is. It's never just one person's takeaway. It never is. No art is what one person says about it. Or even multiple people, or even an entire collective or group, or an entire civilization. Art is more than that. We are more than that. And while Will and Teddy and Apollo and Artemis and Ananshul and Shelley, while a lot of them are so much of me, they are all more than that. And I refuse to believe. I refuse to believe it. I believe that when I keep playing, I'm going to see you strangle that shit. I'm going to see you come out. I'm going to see you break the surface. This person has another question. With the video game being made in tune with the narrative's directive, which comes first? Do you write out the story and then set up the game to follow expectations, or is the gameplay done first and then writing follows in concordance to that performance? Mostly I go into recording gameplay with story beats in mind, and then the gameplay kind of directs where things go and then how things end up. But I do generally have an overall plan and outline for the events before I go into the gameplay sessions. It's a little bit complicated to answer in clear terms because I don't know how clear my terms about how I approach it are. Again, so much of it is so spontaneous and so flying by the seat of my pants, even while I do have usually a solid grasp of what I am wanting and what I have planned. It's a little bit of everything. Like most art, I let it speak to me and I let it direct me where it wants to go. That's how I've kind of always felt about characters that I write or draw or what have you, and how I feel about holistic stories and media that I create. I'm just the muse. I'm letting it guide me. Hopefully that answers you at all. Thank you so much for your questions. Mike L9 asking, what softwares do you use to create Diminish? I mentioned it briefly earlier. For sprite work and animations in pixel art, I use a program called Asprite, I believe is how you pronounce it. Asprite. That is like $15, at least it was when I got it years ago. There is a free version open source called Libre Sprite. Libre Sprite. I don't know exactly what the differences are between them because I've only ever used Asprite, but Libre Sprite seems like basically the same thing. It has quite a bit of power itself. For freehand raster art, I use Clip Studio Paint. Again, that's a version that I've had for years and years, since like 2017 at the latest. And I found that on an amazing deal on Facebook. Back when I used Facebook. It was so discounted. That was awesome. For music production and sound effect production, I use FL Studio 12, Fruity Loops 12 Producer Edition. That was not on sale. I just bought it because I knew that it was going to be so worth it for me because I'm so entrenched in music, and I imagine I always will be. And that program was the one that I already had experience with in trial versions and stuff. And I mostly use sound fonts that I have searched for years online and just hoarded in bits and bits and bits as time has gone on. I use some VSTs as well and some of the FL Studio built-in sound generators like Minisynth. It's a good digital audio interface for me so far. Video editing, Sony Movie Studio Platinum, what version? 17.0. For the game design, I use the Godot or Godot game engine 3.0. And again, like, I know there are a billion updates since then, but I know that I'm going to get way too overwhelmed and all of my existing game files are going to be obsolete or probably never work in the newer stuff. So I have not looked into or touched any of that yet. I still just use 3.0. For recording all of the microphone stuff, I use Audacity. And one of my biggest regrets with Diminish is for the first, at least act and a half, for the first major portion of the series, I did not know what an audio limiter was. And so I painstakingly, manually, second by second by second, in hours and hours and hours and hours of videos, would try to balance all of the microphone audio by hand. This added hours and hours and hours and hours into the editing process. And now I know what a limiter is, and I get to do zero of that now. But already, I'm guessing a fair amount of my burnout with the project now is because so much of the work that I did was that stuff that I never ever had to do if I had only known what an audio limiter was. Embarrassing, sad, it's the way it is. And for recording, Diminish, and as I'm using right now to record this and also do my live streams, I use OBS. The version I'm using right now is 29.1.3, but that's been updated several times since I've started using it with Diminish in 2020. I think that's everything, but I usually forget things whenever I try to list things out, so I'm sure I've forgotten something, and if so, I'll put it in the text, maybe. Thank you so much for your question, Mike L9. Arcane Scribbler has a question. Did any of your own opinions on soup make it into soups of the day? I think this is a great question, and this might reveal just how much about the series that I've forgotten in a vacuum before I actually go through and watch it all from the beginning again. Gazpacho soup, mostly the Red Dwarf reference, and then just me trying to take that and then run with it from Teddy's perspective and just where she is. Just most of the soups begin with kind of an opinion, and then Teddy becomes thoughtful about it in a more metaphorical way. The potato soup speech, I hope I'm correctly referencing what that soup actually is, in Act 1, Episode 18, that references a lot of my feelings about food and eating in general since I made a massive, massive shift in my life and transformed my body from being very unfit and quite overweight to somebody incredibly obsessed with fitness to a kind of minor bodybuilding point, where I at least try to be as lean as possible at all times, which goes so against my body type and genetics and metabolism. My body just wants to put weight on every single moment of my life, and that's usually the exact opposite of what I want. So when Teddy is talking about how she has restricted herself and what it did to her brain, that's, of course, as always with Diminish, that's a lot of me coming out. But that's parallel to your question. It's not exactly what you're asking. I don't know. Like, the chicken broth, she doesn't really express much of what she thinks about it. I don't know. I can't remember if we had a chicken soup of the day. That I just love a good old chicken soup a lot of the time. Tomato soup, she was just trying to troll Will. That's not how I feel about tomato soup. Tomato soup with grilled cheese sandwiches, peak. Yeah, I don't think that there's been a soup yet where I just, like, gave my exact opinions on soup for the period where she's talking about the soup itself before she goes all philosophical and stuff. Hopefully this won't be a question where later when I'm watching the series, I get to a point where I realize, oh no, I should have answered it this way if I had only remembered this. We'll see. In any case, thank you so much for your question, Arcane Skibbler. Arcane Scribbler. I apologize. It was going so well. Tronic925 Care asks, how do you think the sudden popularity explosion of Diminish affected your ability to work on it? This has come up a few times so far. A very specific way to answer this is immediately. It affected me immediately. I very vividly remember the day that I premiered Act 2, Episode 1. I was sitting outside on the deck, and Kitty, or Frisky, was just snoozing on the chair beside me, and I watched the hundreds, and I think we reached 1,000 live viewers in that premiere, and it was still a dream come true, but that was when I started to feel big time the tangible pressure. And I could kind of feel it smothering me a little bit, even in that moment, where I was trying to just enjoy that subtle victory of releasing an episode and celebrating it with everybody who was interested in what was going on. So, did it make it more difficult? Yes, it did. But as my life is progressing, and as I'm progressing, and as new things are developing for me, I'm wondering if maybe that is going to change for me, for the better. And I hope it can for you too, with Rapid Eyes. I really do. You deserve it. Not just as a great creator, and not just from me as a fan of Rapid Eyes, but because I, as you know, fully understand that you just want to be able to have fun creating something and just experience the joy of art. And it's really frustrating and annoying and deflating to have that intruded upon by these like intangible struggles. So I hope that for all of our sakes, that all of us can find that equilibrium. Thank you so much for your question and for everything. Care. The Runaway Writer asks, was Apollo created specifically for Diminish, or did he exist in some way, shape, or form before it? That does mostly fall into what we've discussed about, Apollo's inspirations and Apollo's main origin with Null. But to give you a more clear and direct answer, the exact character Apollo, as we know them and see them in this series, did not exist before Diminish, was created in the day or two after I first got the idea in mid-October 2020. And then was the star of their own web series at the beginning of November, that very next month. Another question from the Runaway Writer. Do you have a favorite episode of Diminish? Yeah, the first one that jumps to mind probably is Act 1, Episode 9, but there are so many moments from so many other episodes that just make me smile. It's really, really, really cool to be pleasantly surprised by your own work. And I think Act 1, Episode 9 is just kind of... It's really hard to pick anything above that one. I mean, Act 1, Episode 17 has a lot of moments. It's a difficult episode to try to process in one sitting all at once. It's a lot to swallow. And Act 2 has a lot of moments for me as well. But as far as a single episode experience from start to end, it's gotta be Act 1, Episode 9 for me. Thank you so much for your questions, the Runaway Writer. And here we have a very challenging name for me. I apologize in advance. The Kpokodul. What are your favorite community-created memes about Apollo or Diminish in general? This might be the toughest question yet, and this is also going to reveal that I should be more entrenched in the community than I am, and oh gosh. Let's look through the shitposting channel in the Diminish Discord right now and see if anything jumps out at me. I know that there have been lots of things throughout the years that have delighted me, but it's been so long that, it's escaping me right now. Ah, yes, excellent. Beautiful. Ah, yes, there's this little YouTube short by Judas Isariot making a "Wake me up inside" with Apollo. Ah, here's one from the olden days of the server. Excellent classic. One of the most enduring memes is just, taking the name Diminish and mispronouncing it. Dish! Dimish! Dimsh! Dimple! And I am the sort of person who definitely appreciates that, always. It never gets old to me. This one is just cool, where somebody made an animated GIF or GIF of most, if not all, of the Apollo portraits in the pause screen that we've seen so far. And I never realized, but it ends up, if you put them in a certain order, creating like a perfect turnaround. I love people sometimes. Oh, this is very cute. That's good stuff, Wheelman. Oh, yes. This could take another hour or so, so I'll say for now, there wasn't anything in particular that was so ingrained in my head that it immediately came up as like a primary answer, but there are so many freaking amazing memes and jokes. Thank you so much for your question, the Kpokdu. Geek Memo saying, one of my biggest questions is, will the game ever be released when the story is finished? Another thing I touched on briefly earlier. In its exact form as we've seen it in the series so far, the version that has been made specifically for Will, that he's been making all of his exact discoveries in, I don't think so. Will Diminish in a possibly similar gameplay experience and different gameplay experiences with new stories be released when Diminish is done? That is definitely my goal, yes. It's absolutely near the front of the things that I want to do once the Diminish web series has come to its conclusion. We've got to get there first, and then I have to be able to pull through and actually make the stuff. But yes, it's looming large in my mind to be able to bring people playable Diminish experiences. The exact game that we're seeing in the web series is kind of made episode by episode. It's not really a playable build at all. It's all very piecemeal. So even if it wasn't made specifically for Will, it would be very, very, very tough to be able to put it all together into a cohesive unit that people could actually frickin' play. But yes, again, I do dearly hope to bring playable Diminish experiences to you in the future. Thank you so much for your question, Geek Memo. Void asks, were there any scenes or set pieces in particular for Diminish that are especially memorable for you as the creator? I think the answer, again, that jumps to my mind the most is the entirety of episode 9. That's kind of its own long scene. By set pieces, I assume you might mean like in-game locations or in-game moments that we might visit for an extended period of time or briefly. By nature, for me, especially with level design, which for me is probably, I think, my weakest attribute as a creator in general, a lot of that seems to fall by the wayside in terms of how I perceive it looking back. Not to say I'm just crapping things out and just like tossing it aside in my memory banks because it doesn't matter to me. That's not true. But yeah, like what it serves stands out to me more in my memory. And that all kind of came together for Act 1, Episode 9. But I also do really love the environment of the ocean cave in Act 2, especially after the tiles in the walls turn blue. I love that little region that Apollo and Will get trapped in for a few episodes in the middle portions of Act 2. So that kind of goes against what I was just saying. Like, that set piece, if we're going to call it that, definitely stands out to me. Thank you so much for your questions, Void. Joe's Ranting Place has a tough one for me, not necessarily because it's tough for me to think of the answer, but because it's tough for me to deliver because I'm a people pleaser. How volatile is the game state of Diminish? As I am to understand it, there are multiple saves which explored different aspects of the game at different times. Heck, some places were never fully explored as they were in other saves. How important is that? And how much of being a completionist matters. Because there were corners of the world not touched, and I clearly remember times when the unlocked air dash wasn't used to reach them. The completionist in me is aching over something being lost forever, and yet not, depending on how much the save system can be utilized, and if the code of the game even allows it. So there are two reasons why I struggle to answer this as a people pleaser. And the first is that because, you know, we're going to have to wait and see. I can't just spoil everything because what your question is pertaining to, I might be making choices with. And if I reveal some of that now, then it's a spoiler. That said, my second answer to that is kind of an inevitable. Like, there's no way that this will end up being a completely completionist experience through all of the game saves that were started, through every single possible stone left unturned being explored. That would just take a ridiculous amount of time to make. It would take a ridiculous amount of time for Will to explore. And there's a certain point where it no longer serves the series itself. And yes, Diminish, the channel, is just supposed to be emulating kind of like a Let's Play channel experience. But Diminish is also a storytelling experience. And the reason that I made things like Act 1, Episode 18, where Will goes back and tries a few things before moving on, is because that episode still served the story, because it led toward the ending of the episode, which was the big story beat where Will reads that soup of the day after he's gone through some tough things, where he failed to kind of process things the way that he felt that other people wanted him to be processing, like with trying out that thing that people wanted him to do with Justin, where it's like, what if you activate him, then drop back down, then go back up? Like, the episode itself set up his mood that he then took into the soup of the day that set up his big monologue. So the reason that I kind of had Will go into a more completionist mode in that sense was because it served the series. So while I won't go into detail about, you know, will we do certain things with certain saves, will try to be as much of a completionist as possible, I will say right now that there's probably no way that I will be able to satisfy the big 100% completionist mode that you're talking about. That would, I can't do that. I have limits, Will has limits, and he's playing the game his way, and if he leaves a lot of stones unturned, it's kind of my way of teaching the audience to be able to accept that. And I don't want to take that patronizing tone with you. That's not, that feels bad. That's not really my intent, but it gives you a little look into my thought process about some parts of that. But I thought that was a really, really good question. Thank you so much for that, Joe's Ranting Place. Dat Neon Fox asking, once Diminish completes, would you ever consider making a digital art book? A concept book, to be precise. I've always wondered how the brainstorming process went when it came character designs or areas for the game. This is also a great question, something I had never ever considered, and I'm really, really glad you asked this because, like, you know, full exposure, I've been doing this through several different sessions, and so by the time we've reached this recording session, I've already recorded and edited a ton of my answers, and I realized that there was one important aspect of my development process in the very earliest stages of Diminish that I have not brought up yet, and it goes perfectly with the answer for this question. So, thank you. Atom thanks you, to be precise. The original version of Apollo in the concept stages of Diminish. I'm so sorry, Atom. I forgot about you when I was talking previously in answering these questions about the early stages of making Diminish and what led me to making Apollo and their design. I just completely glossed over the fact that I had a design for a furry protagonist in Diminish that did not end up making the final cut and has not been seen in the series yet, and I have talked about openly in the past outside of this in like past streams and stuff, and so like talking about it now, if Adam ends up in the series, like the cat's already out of the bag. I'm not talking about spoilers now. Will Atom actually end up in the series? To be honest with you, I'm not sure yet. We'll see. But that's tangential to your question. Once Diminish completes, will I ever consider making a digital art book? I am now. I wasn't before. I am now. I don't know about anything that entails, but I will tell you, it is now in my mind and I will consider it. So thank you for asking the question and having me consider it for the first time, because I think that sounds cool. I will say, like, again, as I mentioned earlier, so much of what I make in Diminish ends up just kind of automatically being the final product. And when that's not the case, the early versions of the things that ended up being put into Diminish, I really, really, really hate looking at because I thought they came out really badly. So that's another part of it that I'd have to consider is like, you know, I do have a decent amount of concept art and stuff lying around. It's just, I think it looks so freaking bad. Do I really want to put that out there in the world? Would people actually want? I mean, there's always value and intrigue in seeing concept versions of final products. It's just, I'd really have to get over some deep-seated issues to be able to actually bite the bullet and put that out in the world, because there are lots of things that I just can't stand looking at that I don't want anyone to see, because I feel like it's just, ugh. Thank you so much for your question, Dat Neon Fox. Mute McCash has 2 questions. The first is, the most important according to Mute McCash, does Apollo have a Napoleon complex when he meets someone taller than him? For those who don't know, the Napoleon complex or syndrome is a pseudoscientific concept of, you know, shorter people, especially shorter men, who take that to heart in a really negative way, will channel that into extremely aggressive or domineering or like conquering social behavior to compensate. And this is an easy one to answer. Absolutely not. Apollo does not care about that whatsoever. And that comes a lot from just kind of how I feel about their height. I thought that it's just like really endearing and cool, and so I have no misgivings about it at all. That's my answer to your first question. The second question, how has making the actual game of Diminish gone? In other words, were there any notable bits in the making of the game or Easter eggs you may not have gotten to in the series? This falls back into a lot of what I've already answered, so I'll try to really briefly summarize. The further I get into the series, the more difficult it is to juggle all those things, because the pile that I'm working with of materials, physical or metaphorical, just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, and there's just so much to get to. So I will say that, but I can't really directly answer that question without providing potential spoilers. So I will have to mostly leave it at that. Thank you so much for your questions, Mute McCash. We have a question from Pow asking, what do you exactly want to make people see in the series? I don't think I have a very good answer to that. That's not generally how I try to approach art or life in general. I am not out here to change anybody. I'm not out here to make anybody feel or think or do anything. That does kind of admittedly run in opposition to some of my gut feelings about the world and some of my instinctive desires and instinctive frustrations with this frickin' world. Where, yeah, like part of me does want to be an evil supervillain and brainwash the entire world to create world peace. What do you mean nobody else wants that? Oh. But in seriousness, no, I just wanted to make something. I just had an idea, and I felt like I could do it, and so I tried it, and yeah, I ended up sharing it, and then other people ended up sharing it, and now here we are. But again, more than that can be true. Opposing things can be true. I also would love to change the world with my art if I can, to be able to change the world in any way, to try to help people, to try to make people happy, to try to lessen pain for people, to help people expand their horizons, to open their minds, to give them new perspective. I guess if I do have general goals with being an artist and doing things in life, it's to be able to create things and put things out there and exemplify things that will outlive me, that can represent all the things that I want to leave in this world when I'm gone, that can leave the most positive influence on the rest of the world that I could possibly leave. And if I regret things about anything that I do, it's only because I feel like it might detract from that end. And that's always the tightrope of making art for yourself and then having goals like that. I don't know if it's a very healthy or good thing to do, to make art for other people, for ulterior purposes, to not make art for you. It's not something that I am going to recommend. And I think some of the root of my struggles with Diminish in recent years has been fighting that war of feeling like I'm moving away from wanting to make Diminish for myself, now that I feel like there's so much extra pressure and so much extra responsibility to so many more people, where I kind of want to make it for them now. Again, it kind of comes back to that trust, where I have to be able to believe in myself and believe that when I make things for me, it will naturally fall into my goals. It will naturally be in a form that can help a wide amount of people, that can make a lot of people feel better about their lives, about the world, that can give them the perspective that I hope that I can give. In some way that maybe I can help make the world a better place, even if that is so much less of a commonsensical ideal than we could ever imagine. I've come to understand that no two people can truly agree on what making the world a better place is. And so I'm just gonna make art, because it's part of how I cope with living in reality in this world. It's part of how I survive. It's just part of me. It's exciting when it becomes a part of other people. It's absolutely freaking terrifying when it becomes a part of other people. Life is just an infinite enigma. I'm glad that I've gotten to share some of my art in my life with all of you before our lives are done. Thank you all so much for sharing the world of Diminish with me so far, and hopefully there's still a lot of time that we can spend with Diminish together before everything is said and done. Our final question is from Zizy Squirrel, asking, is Apollo ever going to get one of those soups of the day? They've got to be hungry by now. You know, I saw this question yesterday and it kind of delighted me. And, you know, for that reason, you'd think that a day later I would have actually come up with an answer by now. But here we are. In a way, I suppose Apollo has had their own soup of the day, with them having many carrots that they took with them into the ocean, which is salty water. And in that way, they could make themselves a soup that has not been seen yet, which is carrot soup. So maybe they're the true winner here. But that makes me wonder, actually. That's an interesting, like, alternate question. Of the soups of the day that we've seen, what would Apollo's favorite soup be? That's interesting to think about, and I don't know if I have an answer for that right now either. But to directly answer your question, is Apollo ever going to get any of those daily soups? I'd say, hell yeah! Let's do it! Headcanon or otherwise, Apollo deserves it. Let's get Apollo some soup! Thank you for your question, Zizy. Thus ends this lengthy question and answering session. Thank you all so very much for all of your amazing questions. I hope that I was able to answer them with any degree of clarity and satisfaction for you. With all of that said and done, it's time to announce the winners of the raffles. What you've all probably been waiting for. Alright everybody, the time has come. Happy New Year. The admission period is closed, and so I have all the names written down from every person who asked a question who did not say that they did not want to receive the poster. And that amounted to 38 names that have been put onto this wheel that I'm about to spin to determine who will win the Diminish poster. 40 inches by 28 inches, and by golly gosh, I really hope that it will be possible to get it sent through the postal system, especially if it is somebody who is in a different country, especially overseas. Really hoping for the best. Let's do this. Oh my goodness, okay, I've never done this before, so at least they make it nice and simple. Big button in the middle that says spin. Is everybody ready? I am going to spin the wheel, and we will see who wins that 1 in 38 chance in 3, 2, 1. Tetris! Alright, there it goes! Whoa! We have Lord Eagle Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Lord Eagle YGO. It was so close to Witty and Magpie. I'm so sorry that it teased you like that. Oh my goodness gracious. The wheel has chosen. This is the only spin that I have done. Lord Eagle Yu-Gi-Oh! You won it. You got it. So, once you see this video, once you see this, I'm trying to think of a good way for you to get in touch with me because, like, I'm on Blue Sky, but because of the weird age verification stuff and it not actually working at all, even though I've tried to get it working, I can't do DMs on Blue Sky. So you might have to DM me on Twitter, or like I DM you if you have a Twitter. Anyway, we'll get it worked out, but we will find a way to get this to you, and you will have a 40-inch by 28-inch Diminish poster. Congratulations once again. But wait, there's more, because that wasn't the only thing being raffled. I also said if you mentioned that you wanted to be entered to try to win the adult US medium unisex Diminish t-shirt prototype, then you could be entered to win that. And so we have one more wheel to spin. We have a different set of names here. You have a 1 in 18 chance to win the shirt because less people outright said they wanted the shirt. That was how you get in. If you did want the shirt and you're not here, it's because I didn't see you explicitly say you wanted the shirt. So I'm sorry if that happened, but this is what we've got. So, one more spin here. Again, this is going to be a one and done. I promise that there won't be any nepotism or anything like that. I don't know if that's the exact correct word to use here, but you know what I mean. 3, 2, 1, Tetris. For a shirt with Apollo on it. That one looks like it's not going to be a tease. We've got Salva Jess. Congratulations, you have won the prototype Diminish t-shirt. Once again, Salva Jess, maybe the best way to get in touch with me directly would be through Twitter DMs, which is, I'm sorry if that's inconvenient, or if we need to work out another way, you can leave a comment and we'll figure something out. I do have Discord, so in both cases, with Lord Eagle, YGO, and Salva Jess, like, you can provide, like, your Discord name in a comment if you're comfortable with that, and then I can just add you on Discord and we can do it that way. Whatever you want, we'll figure it out. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you to everybody who asked the questions. Thank you for everybody who commented, who offered support and friendly words and encouragement and really, really nice comments. Every single comment on that video has just really uplifted me. It's been truly incredible. And thank you all for all of your support throughout the years, whether it be in my community or through Diminish itself. It means much more than I can possibly express, as I say every single time, and it's freaking true. There are no words that can really do it justice. Even though there are times when I'm burnt out or I'm down about things, it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate you all to the utmost. Thank you. And so, I guess that's it. This has been a project in itself, a month-long undertaking in a way, because I ended up answering every single question. 38 people, and quite a few of them had multiple questions. I took it upon myself to commit to answering every single one that I saw, and hopefully I got to all of them. Hopefully I didn't let anybody slip through the cracks with both the question answering and with the raffle itself. I'm really sorry if that happened. I tried to be thorough, so hopefully that didn't happen. But all that to say, this ended up being quite a bit of work, especially because I wanted to be somewhat thorough with the editing process and make it somewhat pretty and intuitive to look at and have things that were complementing what I was saying on the screen. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that all of you found my answers helpful or illuminating, entertaining, just like if you're a casual observer and you're just looking for something to pass some time. I hope this could do that for you too. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching. Much more to come in this space, on the Seiria Spaces, and of course, on the channel of Diminish and the things surrounding it. Will, Teddy, Apollo, and all of the rest of you, your story is not finished yet. and I'm going to see it through. Dream on, folks. I wish you all the best. Peace. Onward to 2026.